Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, and I say hello to you for the 600th time as the host of this program. And by now you know the drill. With a busy weekend coming up for UJ recruiting, we're going to talk a lot about that. Jeff Sintel going to be with us a little later on. Also, plenty of looks at the Rose Bowl as well as the Georgia preparations continue for the Sooners. Practice getting ready to begin, and you got folks talking about this game from both sides. We'll do all of it with you as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
This is the final weekend of recruiting before the early signing period begins next week. And, of course, Georgia expected to have as many as 7 five-star prospects, some commits, some uncommitted players on campus this weekend. We'll have more with Jeff Sintel on that here in a moment on DawgNation Daily. But listen, if you want to be an alpha dog, black belt recruiting program, you can't just wait for the players to come to you on the weekend, even if you've got a bunch of good ones coming. You got to go to them and sort of lay the groundwork yourself for how all of that's going to unfold. And, well, Georgia's doing that this week. An example of that coming from five-star offensive lineman Cade Mays. And you know the story with Mays here. He's from Knoxville. His dad played at Tennessee. He was the centerpiece of the 2018 recruiting class for the Vols for a while, but the turmoil with Butch Jones caused a decommitment. I think the unrest with who it would hire to replace Butch Jones may have closed any door on Mays getting him back involved with Tennessee, and now it looks like it's a Georgia-Clemson head-to-head battle for Mays' services here. And, of course, Mays is one of those guys that's expected to be at Georgia this weekend. But as we said, Georgia's going to do its part with Mays before the official visit weekend begins. I thought this picture from Cade Mays' Snapchat was hilarious here. Mays is in his religion class, and you see over his shoulder Georgia offensive line coach Sam Pittman. Now, if you're not watching our video right now, I'll explain this to you. What I'll do is I'll put a link. Now, I'm 1,000 years old. The chances of me being able to link a Snapchat into the audio version of the show when I post it at DawgNation.com, probably not that great, but I'll try to put a link to the picture. Many of you have probably already seen this by now anyway. If you're watching us on video, you can see it right now. Mays over his shoulder, there in his class, there in his high school in Knoxville, is offensive line coach Sam Pittman. He's got the 8.5 by 11 notebook paper, loose leaf paper in his hand. He looks very much like a high school student, albeit a very old one. And what I love about that picture so much, and I know that many of you are going to feel the same way that I do about this, is it does seem to be a great snapshot of what we already think we like about Sam Pittman and what Pittman seems to represent about what Georgia does right now as a staff, which is just outworks everybody on the trail and sort of comes up with, more clever ideas, just ways to show just how tenacious it wants to be with prospects of an incredibly high value like what Cade Mays is. And I know that for a lot of the online chatter, you would have it sort of be told that maybe Mays is more of a Clemson lean than a Georgia lean. For instance, if you go to those 24/7 Sports Crystal Balls, which is sort of a synopsis of what everybody around the nation's thinking about recruits, most of the recent predictions for Mays have had Mays ending up at Clemson and not Georgia. But I got to tell you, and maybe this is a homer opinion, it may not be that surprising that the host of DawgNation Daily says something like this, but I got to tell you, with Georgia in the position that's in with Mays right now, I'm not so sure that I buy the national chatter on this, that Mays is more likely Clemson than he is Georgia. And part of that reason for me is because I have that much respect for Sam Pittman, both in what Pittman was going to do in an in-home in Knoxville this week and what Pittman and the rest of the Georgia staff can do in terms of official visits here this weekend in Athens. I just think that Sam Pittman's the kind of guy that has a chance to get this kind of stuff done. And don't take my word for this necessarily. Trust what the other offensive linemen who've been recruited by Sam Pittman say. For instance, just this week, when Trey Hill, the 4-star offensive lineman from down in Houston County, committed to Georgia, one of the guys that he was talking about being influential in his decision, as you might imagine, was the Georgia offensive line coach Sam Pittman. Here is what Hill told us then he likes about Pittman as a coach.
How important is Sam, Coach Pittman, to your decision?
He's very important. That's the type of guy that you want to be a coach. He get guys where they want to be in life, on the field, off the field. He's just a great coach all around.
Yeah, great coach all around. He gets people to where they want to go in life. And what Trey Hill is saying there, even though he doesn't, completely express it explicitly, is that it's about the relationship that Pittman builds with those guys, that there's just a trust that's developed with the players and a guy like Pittman because of, how relentlessly he works to show them that he cares about them, including going to Cade Mays' religion class here this week. But it's not just 2018 recruits that are feeling this way about Pittman. It's 2017 guys as well. You remember back from one of our recent Marlowe's broadcasts from a year ago when we had Andrew Thomas, who at the time was just a Georgia commit. He turned out to be Georgia's starting right tackle all season long. But when he met with us at Marlowe's, Andrew told us about just how much the Sam Pittman personality and the Sam Pittman ability to create a relationship, how much that meant to him on the recruiting trail. Here's Andrew Thomas from last year.
See, when I first met him, he was at Arkansas. That's when I first met him. He came down to meet me, and as you guys know, I have really long arms, and he came down, and we were standing on the basketball court, and he was like, boy, you can reach down to the bottom of the court from right here with those long arms. And every time I come up to go see him, he's just a great coach, and I try not to get caught up into, how many guys he's got into the league. I try to pay attention to, his relationship with the players. I talked to some of his players, and, you can tell that he really cares for his players and not just about football, but as your development as a young man.
So what I believe is what worked on Andrew Thomas for the class of 2017, what's already worked on Trey Hill for the class of 2018 is probably going to work here on Cade Mays as well. And I don't disrespect the push that Clemson makes here, but I just believe that what Sam Pittman can offer in terms of his ability to build relationships is just going to be the thing that ultimately wins the day, and it doesn't hurt to have Mays here coming up on campus here for this final weekend. And kind of a final thought on this, we were talking the other day on AT&T SEC Country Live, and on that show, I worked with Mike Johnson, and you hear Mike on DawgNation Daily during the week from time to time as well, and Mike was talking about his own recruitment. Those of you that are aware, Mike was a very good player at Alabama, an offensive lineman just like Cade Mays is, and he told the story about how he played for Nick Saban for his final 2 years, but he was recruited by Shula at the beginning, and Mike Shula makes his in-home visit to Mike Johnson before Mike officially kind of signed and enrolled at Alabama, and his dad had cooked some ribs. It was the same kind of thing that you hear about all these in-home visits, the big meal, and everybody sitting around the table. And Mike said something I thought was really interesting. He said, this is one of those moments where it's tough for coaches because they have this kind of meal over and over again. They take these kinds of visits over and over again. And there is that moment when everybody at the table just sort of feels like they've said everything that can be said. And we all know what this is like, lulls in conversation. And, the guys I believe that are the best recruiters are the guys that sort of fight through that and just find something interesting to talk about and find some way to keep families entertained and find some way to turn these dinners and these in-home visits or these high school visits in a way to further that relationship that ultimately leads to a commitment and then a national letter of intent being signed. Sam Pittman's just good at that kind of stuff. So listen, Clemson may seem right now like the team to beat for Cade Mays. But with Georgia having Sam Pittman on its side, like a lot of these other recruits are visiting this weekend, my guess is that when the early signing period rolls around, it's going to be a lot of good news for the Georgia Bulldogs, Cade Mays included. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Great to have you with us here for the 600th time. This is episode number 600 for us here on DawgNation Daily, and we are really excited to have you a part of it, no matter how long you've been with us. We weren't on video, but we are now. You can watch us at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page. We appreciate you checking me out and watching us and interacting with questions and comments. We love that. Of course, we're also available in podcast form wherever podcasts can be found, iTunes, SoundCloud, DawgNation.com. Also on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. A lot of places to find DawgNation Daily now. It wasn't true when we first began, but we've been really excited to be a part of the growth and certainly appreciate all of you for making it possible because there would be no DawgNation Daily without all of y'all. So I certainly appreciate that. And I'd love to see you this upcoming Tuesday. Speaking of recruiting, whatever goes down with Georgia this official visit weekend, we'll be covering it all for you heading into the start of the early signing period with our countdown to signing day event at Marlowe's. We're at the Marlowe's in Emory Point here this week. A lot of folks have been asking for us to get on that side of town. So we will be coming up this Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. It's 1520 Avenue Place, the Marlowe's in Emory Point. Love to have you be with us. Love to have you come on by and see us. Jeff Sintel and me will do an off-air conversation, a special Facebook Live broadcast, and last week we had Dominic Blaylock as a special guest. Who knows what special guest we may have in store for you this upcoming Tuesday. We'll see you from 6 to 8 p.m. there at the Marlowe's at Emory Point. All right, I've got Jeff Sintel coming up here today on DawgNation Daily. A lot to do before we get to that. Let me start with the news from yesterday that broke just as we were going off the air on video here on DawgNation Daily, and that is the Georgia linebacker Natrez Patrick has his charges dropped. The guy that was sort of leading the way in terms of coverage of this and reporting on this was Mark Schlabach from ESPN.com. Let me show you a couple of the tweets here from Schlabach to kind of bring us up to speed on what he was able to report. First of all, letting us know that the charges were dropped on Natrez Patrick, that he was not going to face criminal charges for that. It's the district attorney in office in Winder. And by the way, I'm reading from the Schlabach tweet here on the screen. Dismissed the marijuana misdemeanor charge against Natrez Patrick. Of course, he was there at the traffic stop on December 3rd with the backup wide receiver, Jason Stanley. And then later on, Schlabach had another tweet that was even more interesting than that, which shows you just how much marijuana apparently was found in the car which Patrick was in. And if you're watching this on video, you've seen this. If not, once again, I'll try to put a link to this in our audio version of our show today when it's posted to DawgNation.com. There's a shiny penny inside an evidence bag, and just to the top left and above of that penny is a little bit of marijuana, and it's much, much smaller than the penny. In fact, all these little fragments of marijuana pieces all together equal only a portion of what the penny would be, so it leads you to believe that that's not very much marijuana whatsoever that was even in this car, and that's part, I guess, of the defense here against Natrez Patrick. And this is one of those things where most Georgia fans are going to feel a certain way, and most folks outside the bubble of DawgNation may feel a slightly different. You're going to have some naysayers out there that say, oh, look at Georgia, guys getting in trouble here before the Rose Bowl, and the Dog fan's going to say, but the charges against Patrick were dropped. And, it's amazing to me. It seems like when we get into the world of college football, we almost forget about how, due process and rights and, legal opportunities are supposed to go. And whether you're a famous football player or not, you do have a right to face your accuser, and you have a right to defend yourself in a court of law. You have a right to see the evidence that's presented against you and make your own case for why the charge is supposed to be dropped here. I think in this case, Natrez Patrick availed himself of those rights in a good way. I'm thankful that he got the legal representation that he needed to get this done, and I think this is how the legal process is supposed to work. Police have a job to do. They do it, but the folks that are charged with crimes have an opportunity to defend themselves from those charges. And in this case, Natrez Patrick used that and got the charges dropped, and I don't see any reason why Patrick shouldn't be available to play for Georgia in the Rose Bowl. But obviously for some folks outside the bubble of DawgNation, this is going to be a semi-controversial issue there. But nonetheless, Patrick does get the good news on that front. Speaking of the Rose Bowl, before we bring on Jeff Sintel, I do want to talk a little bit more about the Rose Bowl here a little bit and kind of reference what I think is the growing narrative for what's going to go down on that game there on January the 1st. It's obviously the battle of what we think of as an elite Oklahoma offense, numbers certainly back that up, and a truly elite Georgia defense that stopped virtually every opponent that's played all season long, I guess with the exception of the one regular season blemish against Auburn. And how do these two teams combine together? What kind of storyline does that sort of set in motion for the Rose Bowl on January the 1st, where former Georgia running back and NFL Hall of Famer Terrell Davis was on ESPNU's Sirius XM satellite channel, and he's picking a Georgia win, although maybe a much lower score than most people would have probably guessed. Here's Terrell Davis. I thought this was kind of interesting.
I got to be a little biased here. I'm hoping that it plays out like this, where Georgia's defense, which I saw in the SEC championship, just looked phenomenal, and they have pretty much the entire year. Now they're going to have their hands full, no question about it. But if they can play defense, the old sort of adage, play defense, run the football, young quarterback, just make enough plays to win this game, which I think will happen. I see Georgia pulling this thing off. It'll be a close game. I'm predicting a score of maybe 24-21 Bulldogs.
So a close game and a Georgia win, that's not necessarily that surprising, but neither of these two teams getting to 30 points, there is something about that does seem to be, at least in my mind, a little bit unlikely. I think what we've kind of settled on here, we've done this mostly during our comment section portion of DawgNation Daily for the folks that watch us on video, but the last couple of days we've kind of settled on this idea that the winner of this game probably gets into the 30s and the loser might not. So there's a possibility that Georgia holds Oklahoma under 30. I think it is, to dispute what David Pollack said not that long ago. I think it is a possibility that happens. But the winner of this game almost certainly has to get to 30. So from that standpoint, I think that Terrell Davis might be a little off in his prediction, although I think that he's spot on when he says that Georgia has a really good chance to win this game. Now, the flip side of this from the Oklahoma standpoint is they know that Georgia's going to continue to try to do everything it can to minimize the opportunities for Baker Mayfield. That means big doses of Sony Michel and Nick Chubb and DeAndre Swift. And, of course, Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley, very impressed with what Georgia brings to the table from a running back perspective. Here's what he said about that trio earlier this week.
They got 3 guys that can play for anybody in the country. We've always felt like in recruiting backs, we felt like we've always had a pretty good thing here. And we always have kind of felt like that us in Georgia have kind of been the standard, with tailback recruiting and just overall depth. If you look over the last several years, that's always respected the guys they've been able to bring in there and the quality depth and just they've just had consistently good players there for a long time. So, and that certainly shows up on tape.
I think the difference, though, between the Georgia running backs and the Oklahoma running backs is that while Oklahoma's running backs have compiled yards, and many of them have gone on to good NFL careers, Georgia running backs run the ball when the defense knows it's coming and oftentimes still cannot stop it. So I do expect big performance from the Georgia running backs in the Rose Bowl. And even though Georgia wants to keep it on the ground, I think there's a really good chance that Georgia ends up scoring more points than some of the experts expect. In fact, it may have to if it wants to beat the Sooners. It's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily for the 600th time on our program. Of course, we'll do today like we have so many other times in the past. We'll talk to Jeff Sintel about everything going on with Georgia recruiting. Huge weekend coming up. Early signing period beginning next week. Great time to have him in the program. Thankful to have you with us as well. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So Jeff Sintel joins us here on DawgNation Daily. No doubt ear to the ground for everything that's going to happen for Georgia recruiting this weekend. And Jeff, I was telling the audience before you joined us, this is our 600th episode of DawgNation Daily. And I guess you've been with us for what? At least a couple hundred of those 600. Wouldn't you think so?
Let me see. Carry the one, track, say something that a Georgia Tech graduate would know far better than I would, blah, 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 blah. I would say probably maybe 200, Brandon, but congratulations on 600, man. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and let's transition to something that Georgia Tech graduates would know nothing about, and that's 4- and 5-star prospects. A lot of those expected to be on campus for Athens this weekend. One of the guys that I was talking about before you joined us off the top of the show is Cade Mays. The great picture of Sam Pittman in Mays' religion class this week there at his Knoxville High School, and the expected arrival for his official visit to Athens this weekend. Is this late push for Georgia getting the FaceTime with Pittman going to be enough to hold off Clemson, you think?
I tell you what, catching a recruit in religion class, that's kind of getting it right to the nitty-gritty, man. I mean, and it's got the look on his face. The look on his face was kind of like, yeah, I know I'm doing everything DawgNation needs me to do to land this young man. And I tell you what, Brandon, your forum provides a pretty interesting temperature check right now. I want to know if everybody out there listening to DawgNation Daily right now, watching DawgNation Daily, if they had to award the current DawgNation title belt for Recruiter of the Year on the Georgia staff, is that going to Sam Pittman or is that going to Dell McGee? And I would love to hear your opinion on that one, Mr. Adams.
So, I mean, I think you probably for now have to go for McGee because of all the hay that he has in the barn right now. But there is an element of Pittman that almost represents what we think of this Georgia staff. You know, McGee's kind of a cool customer, right? He's always kind of smiling in those pictures, and he seems to be everywhere. And he's certainly got the 5-star quarterback and running backs all in his cell phone. He's got those great relationships. But Pittman's almost like the perfect embodiment of what we think Georgia coaches are doing right now, which is whatever they have to do to kind of get in good with these players. So while the hardware may belong to Dell McGee, the photo op sort of does belong to Pittman here, I think. Man,
I think Pittman is so shrewd at what he does. He might be moving the elf on the shelf for a lot of families in that Georgia's recruiting. That's how that guy's everywhere right now and embedded with his recruits. And I guess if this was an election, we'd probably say, McGee has the lead, but there are several precincts from Buckhead and Knoxville that have yet to report on that decision, which could make some late intrigue about that. But, man, that would be splitting hairs trying to figure out who is doing a better job at recruiting the elite talent and the elite talent that Georgia needs to win in the SEC for years and years and years to come. And, hey, quick aside for everybody, what everybody thought was going to happen has actually happened. One of the neatest little or most interesting, I'll say, sleights of hand in the recruiting game has just happened in terms of breaking news. the talented four-star outside linebacker, King Makuta, out of Troup County in LaGrange, has made his decision. Oddly enough, his finalists were Miami, Georgia, and Florida State, and he chose Alabama. So maybe he had a top three, but maybe the zero school all along was going to be, the ground zero school all along was going to be Alabama. Not much of a shock considering what Georgia's building up at outside linebacker in his position in 2018 and 2019. But so Georgia, not many, some folks, if they thought that Georgia had a shot at the King, they were misguided because he was kind of an Alabama lean all along.
Well, here's why you get paid the big bucks as the recruiting expert, because, you know, King the other day, he has his edit for his top three. He's got, you know, Georgia right there in the middle, arms spread wide. He had Miami, and I forget who the other one was, but that was his top three edit. And as you said, the school that King chooses wasn't even one of his top three. So this is why the recruiting world is sort of made for experts like yourself, because you got to chase this stuff down, even when the actual school that gets picked was not one of the ones that were called the three finalists. That is quite a twist and turn for Mr. Makuta's recruiting process there.
Oh, man. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe it's going to be kind of funny when somebody, I mean, I wasn't watching the live broadcast, but I guess that might have been pretty awkward for him to have three hats on the table and then reach under the table and pull out an Alabama hat. That's kind of a bad metaphor, I think, for college recruiting and college athletics if the hat comes from under the table and he puts it on. But I'm a big fan of these young men having their moments and making their decisions exactly the way that they want them to be, especially because they're the ones that wake up every morning and lift and work out and train and grind and put all the miles on their cars to go see all these schools. So I hope King had a ceremony that was everything he wanted to be. And make no mistake about it, you're talking about a top 100 player in 2019. I think he's the nation's number 5 outside linebacker, an incredible wingspan of over 80 inches. Alabama, and it's no surprise here, is getting a very good recruit for 2019.
So let me talk to you. You mentioned Dale McGee a moment ago. One of the guys that McGee was influential with was 5-star quarterback Justin Fields. How is it going to work with Fields next week? Is he just going to maybe just sort of drop a signature out of the blue and he does become an early signee? Will he speak publicly about either his intention to or not sign early? I mean, this is kind of one of those, I don't know, unclosed loops that sort of hangs over the head of Georgia's 2018 class a little bit, that Fields hasn't fully confirmed his intentions to sign early. I mean, how do you think that's going to play out here over the next few days?
Well, I know it's something everybody seems to worry about, and I can grant them for their worries because he is the nation's number 2 overall player now and quite a prospect in every sense of the term. But I guess it kind of seems like a situation like we just spoke about there with the talented linebacker from Troup. This is just the way Justin goes about doing things. If you follow his recruiting, he doesn't like to really broadcast or spotlight what he plans to do. He likes to just kind of make his moves on his own timeline. I would just counsel everybody to think about, with the daily Justin Fields question, sometimes we have to do, and it is part of the work we do here. But just watch his social media. Watch how he says, welcome home, welcome to the family. Watch how he tweets out pro-Georgia images. Watch how he, tweets that picture when, Dale McGee and the whole offensive staff stops by. He is not promoting any sort of recruiting from any other schools. And the young man has kind of worked tirelessly behind the scenes and kind of putting together this class for Georgia. I think really if you had to look at it, Georgia's whole recruiting got a big lightning rod right around mid-June when he decommit, when Zamir White commit, and then you see the players start stacking up for Georgia. Go back and look at the feed of when he commits to Georgia, the glee and pure joy on his face. There's just so many reasons to think everything's okay right now with Justin Fields, and he's just going to do things on his own terms and the way he wants to do it. I would expect, if everybody's looking for some sort of news peg, I would expect maybe to be some clarification sometime right before the early signing period about what he's planning to do. But I would say, DawgNation, again, this is my go-to line on this. No really need right now to bite your nails to the quick worrying about Justin Fields.
All right, I agree with you, Jeff, but for the purposes of our audience, let me play devil's advocate here for a moment. You say that, hey, that social media chatter from Justin Fields where he's always congratulating Georgia recruits or, publicly recruiting for Georgia on Twitter, that's all the evidence you need. I would counter with that, though, that Emory Jones is still recruiting for Ohio State on Twitter. There are plenty of Alabama people who still think he's flipping towards the Crimson Tide. So isn't it fair to say that sometimes what recruits say on social media one way or another isn't as much proof as maybe some fans would want it to be?
Yeah, but with Emory's case, he's giving interviews to the effect that there is some doubt, that he is taking visits. He's made multiple official visits to other schools after his decision. Remember, he's been committed way back. He committed before Trevor Lawrence did to the class of 2018, and that's going back a ways. I think he committed in mid-summer of 2016. And I would just say this. Justin hasn't made any sort of official visits elsewhere since he committed to Georgia. He has been to Georgia at every opportunity. I fully expect him to be at Georgia this weekend, perhaps taking his official visit, perhaps taking another unofficial visit. But it's not really like he hasn't had lots of decisions to make during the fall. What I mean by that is like he made his college decision, but then lately he's been worried about his rehab with his finger, getting his cast off. Maybe his ultimate focus is trying to get back on the field and ready to play. He's got his eyes on that Under Armour All-American game. And he's a guy that, to me, he's got to think about whether he wants to finish out his high school year and play baseball. He's got to figure out, to be devil's advocate for Justin Fields' camp just a little bit here. Everybody watches all these coaching changes. Everybody watches all this traction and movement. I do think that a lot of the reasons why Justin Fields loves Georgia is a big fraction of that is how he feels about the relationship there with Dale McGee. Dale McGee has had some overtures, and rightfully so, with other schools. It's not like the landscape has not been changing a little bit for Georgia, but Georgia has done nothing. The case for Georgia has been nothing. Nothing. In some ways, Georgia has only gotten a lot prettier and a lot more attractive to Justin, considering the steps the program has taken this year. So I know that's not going to be the answer. I'd love to tell you guys, it's just a King Makuta type thing, and he's going to do this on December the 20th. I'd love to be able to share that type of, enriching and, yes, there is the Santa Claus news for everybody out there regarding Justin Fields, but sometimes it is what it is, and that's what we know as of now.
So let me just one more quick Fields question, then I promise we're going to talk about some other guys because there's actually a lot I still want to hit with you. But, a lot of folks are going to connect the dots between Matt Corral going to Ole Miss, which seems like sort of a curious choice. Bowl ban, reduction in scholarships. He did say he wanted to play in the SEC, but this seems like about as low as you can go in the SEC and still be in the league. No connection between Corral going to Ole Miss and what Florida may have tried to do with Fields in the past.
No, I think it's a matter of Dan Mullen looking elsewhere, everywhere else, for a quarterback for his new program, aside from the one that he was committed to, that was committed to Florida. If you just look at the schematics of it, I mean, Matt Corral is not a Dan Mullen quarterback. There's no parallels there to a Cam Newton or Dak Prescott or even a Nick Fitzgerald. He's just not that big enough guy that's going to enhance that run game the way that Dan Mullen likes to do with the type of multiple options and the offense he likes to run. I think simply for Matt, Shea Patterson has left the building. Not a lot of great quarterback prospects at Ole Miss. This was a chance for him to parachute into an SEC program and probably contend to play right away and challenge for the starting job as a freshman and maybe start 2 or 3 years. I think this is just Matt Corral, who has definitely been around the gamut. Let's see here. He has changed high schools, but he's also committed to USC. Serious overtures with Georgia before everything happened there with Fields warming to Georgia. And then you had him going to Florida, and now making another lap going to the SEC West for the Ole Miss Rebels. So it's a long journey for Matt Corral in terms of finding the fit that he wants, and I think maybe that might be the final stop for him at Ole Miss.
So speaking of Ole Miss, let me shift the conversation to wide receivers here for a moment. There's been some online chatter as of late about Elijah Moore, a UGA wide receiver commit, ending up at Ole Miss as part of this class of 2018. Is this about a sort of I don't want to say reprioritizing that, but sort of a reshuffling of the deck for Georgia at receiver here? Is a guy like Tommy Bush maybe getting the spot that Elijah Moore was going to occupy? Is Bush maybe just a better fit? I know that Rashad Baseman, the wide receiver, I guess, from Tift County, is also kind of in this mix here a little bit. Can you kind of give us an idea of how things either might be staying the same or changing when it comes to Georgia and its wide receiver priorities for 2018?
Well, let me see if I can cover a lot of ground here fast the way Elijah Moore would. You got to remember, Georgia. The people that worry about Elijah Moore would probably say, "Hey, he has not been presented the option to sign early. That may or may not be a tell." Elijah Moore also cannot graduate early out of St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. That might also be a tell. The other thing there with Elijah, though, is he's kind of a lot like Kearis Jackson, and Georgia is going to have, for the time being, a lot of those really fast inside slot receivers. So Georgia maybe doesn't have a big receiver in the class of 2018 yet. They also really got one last year who I think would be a really good one in Matt Landers. But to look at everything, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit. Remember, Alontae Taylor was a thought for Georgia at receiver until he warmed back the Rocky Top. So I think the overtures for Tommy Bush, if you saw the stand shift a little bit earlier, especially last week when Tommy Bush was planning to fly in for his official visit, that was a pretty clear tell about how Georgia needed to look elsewhere for Alontae Taylor's spot. And I think Bush is a guy that also will not enroll early. I think he has a private top 5, and I do believe Georgia is in there. But Tommy Bush will also be in Athens this weekend on his official visit. He will arrive around in Athens and get in town around 6 p.m. tonight. Big official visit, 6'4.5", runs a 4.4, about 190 pounds. Could kind of fit into that Javon Wims sport coat type role as that big target for Jake Fromm for the classes going forward and the seasons going forward. Other thing to note right there is Rashad Baseman. And I got to give the young man a lot of credit for a lot of integrity and conviction on this one. This was a case where Georgia and a lot of other schools just finally saw his senior film and they woke up to how good Mr. Bateman was. But what happened all through the course of his senior year is Minnesota was there with its big paddles and its big oars, and they loved Rashad Bateman. They were recruiting him hard. They developed a really strong bond. That's the way recruiting should really work. And when you want to reference something back to Justin Fields, Rashad Bateman's commitment was entrenched. It was solidified. It was built up over time with Minnesota. That's why he's going to sign with Minnesota during the early signing period. And it is very hard, even for a big name, even for the big in-state flagship school that's waving that SEC championship flag. It is very hard for a school to just come in, maybe with all the Ric Flair wardrobe on and the glitz and glamour, and try to flip a kid like that. And, I'm going to say props here to Rashad and Mr. Bateman on that, because he's kind of dating the girl that he's been dating all along, and he is quite happy with, even when the prettiest girl in the state comes calling and wants to go out with him. We'll go out with him to see the Star Wars movie tonight or something like that. He's sticking to his guns, and I can only applaud Rashad Bateman for doing that.
I want to rattle through some other names here pretty quickly. We showed here on DawgNation Daily the in-home, or I should say in-school visit that Georgia coaches, including Kirby Smart, had with Brenton Cox the other day. That's a pretty big show of force, almost like the Justin Fields treatment that Brenton Cox got. Not to be outdone by that, even if it's a few days late, was Nick Saban, Alabama. I think we have the image of Saban in Alabama with Brenton Cox here just a couple days before he gets ready to start his official visit to Georgia over the weekend. If you're watching this on video, you can see Saban and Tosh Lapoy with Brenton Cox right there at Stockbridge High School. What do you think that Saban's message is to Brenton before he goes to Athens? And is this down to Georgia, Alabama for Brenton Cox? And is there an edge? Is there a leader right now?
Heavy lean to Georgia. I think Alabama wanted to get some face time right before he takes his official. And remember, the official is going to carry you all the way up to the dead period on the 17th, I believe, when you can no longer talk to recruits or visit with recruits face-to-face. You just imagine all the momentum for Georgia, the relationships that Brenton has with players at Georgia that are already there and also on their way. It just bodes well for Georgia in this race. And you got to remember, I just go back to that conversation I had with with Brenton after his final playoff game. And I almost had to kind of redirect the questioning to make sure that he still felt that Alabama was in there. And he had to kind of be reminded that it was a top three along with Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. And that's maybe something for Georgia fans to feel pretty good about, that even before he was in Athens last weekend, I hope everybody remembers that. He was in Athens on an unofficial last weekend during the snow. A lot of momentum there for Georgia in terms of adding another 5-star to its class of 2018.
Can you update me on Otis Reese? I know at one point in time it was unknown if he was even going to sign in December. I know he's a relatively private recruit. He's certainly visited Georgia plenty. Is there a chance that that Reese becomes a member of Georgia's class here during the month of December, or is this a February wait no matter what for Otis?
February wait no matter what. Otis has told me he doesn't do interviews. I kind of regard him as kind of the unicorn interview in college football right now. Nobody's talking to Otis Reese. He's, of course, playing in the state championship game tonight down in Leesburg against Coffee. But I will tell you, he plans to go his entire senior year of school, and he does not plan to make his final decision until February. That's the best, most accurate information I can give you right now on Otis Reese, unless that has changed within the last 2 or 3 days.
How about Channing Tindall? Is there a chance that Tindall, I think at one point in time he was definitely expected to be a February guy. Is there a chance that that could change for him at all?
Sure. Yesterday on the Intel, we updated the case with Channing Tindall pretty clearly. Channing will take his second official visit to Georgia over this weekend. His first visit was to Auburn. It is simply an Auburn, Georgia, South Carolina discussion. South Carolina, he would have that home field. It's also the number one school in sports medicine, and that's the field that Channing Tindall wants to study in college. Auburn, his best relationship with a recruiter, period, is with Travis Williams. Travis Williams would often get in touch with him after his game film drops of his week-to-week games during his senior year, offer critiques, offer pointers, offer tips. It's those three schools. Reminder here that Channing Tindall grew up in a house-divided home. His father and himself were the Georgia fans. His mother and all her sisters went to South Carolina. Those were the Gamecocks in the household. So, that's the situation there. He tells me that he will not sign until the February signing date. He will not enroll early, but he could potentially make his decision prior to the U.S. Army All-American game, and that would be right around December 31st, January 1st, January the 2nd. So there's a lot of clear points now for Channing Tindall's recruitment for everybody to kind of focus on.
So let me finish with this, Jeff, and I'm going to go open-ended with this. I've tried to ask you the stuff that I could think to ask. Anything left from either the official visitors this weekend, what needs to happen before the dead period? Any final thoughts you want to leave us with in terms of what we should be watching for, what we should be listening for? Anything you want to plant into our head here before you leave us?
There will be one big surprise during the early signing period for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Whoa. Wow. So that's a pretty interesting thing to say to close our conversation, Jeff.
I'm dropping the microphone on that one. I've got a zipped up lip emoji on that one. That's what you're getting, sir. And it's only because you put in 600 shows for DawgNation. I mean, if you'd asked me that after 581, I would have dropped one of those vanilla counterpoint Justin Fields' answers right now. But that's what you got, sir. Happy 600, Brandon.
Jeff Sentell, thank you so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Well, now all I want to know is who the surprise from Jeff Sentell there at the end is going to be. And listen, he does not say stuff like that lightly. When Jeff says something like that, there's a lot of weight I would think you got to put behind that. That's kind of an interesting thought for us to close out our conversation with, a surprise coming here from the Georgia Bulldogs, I assume. Pretty interesting stuff from Jeff Sentell. And listen, I don't take Jeff's time lightly either. That's 20-plus minutes of me peppering him with recruiting questions, and he's good enough to give us his time here on DawgNation Daily. And A lot of the reason why we made it to 600 shows is because of recruiting information like that. Truly Centel Intel. He gives a lot of it to us here on DawgNation Daily. We're grateful for that. By the way, real quick, speaking of 600 shows, I don't want to make this whole thing be about me, but coming up in just a few minutes, I've unearthed some very old audio from episode 1 of DawgNation Daily. This is actually a pretty interesting thing to play today in honor of our 600th show. I'll do that with you coming up. Before that, though, let me also remind you that DawgNation Daily brought to you in part today by our friends at Kroger, who've got their Holiday Seafood Roadshow coming up starting on December 20th. It goes all the way through January the 2nd. You talk about some great deals and some great seafood. Buy one, get one free lobster tail. Alaskan king crab legs, $24.99 a pound. Colossal cooked shrimp, $12.99 a pound. Jumbo Gulf shrimp, $9.99 a pound when you use the Kroger card. All of that for you there. The Holiday Seafood Roadshow starting December 20th there at Kroger. When you use your card, you're going to get some terrific deals at Kroger. And listen, I love the idea of some great seafood to celebrate your holiday gathering, whatever it might be. Really good idea. Really good stuff from our friends over there at Kroger. Let me also say, as we transition to our SEC through, I talked to Jeff a moment ago about the Matt Corral thing. And I am truly of the belief that Jeff is right, that Georgia does not have anything to be concerned about when it comes to Justin Fields. And that the Matt Corral commitment to Ole Miss, as weird as it sort of might look, given Ole Miss stature in the SEC right now with bowl bans and scholarship reductions and an interim coach who sort of tabbed at the last minute to get the full-time head coaching position, that seems kind of strange. But to me, that speaks more to the failure of Dan Mullen here to secure a quarterback than it does, some sort of behind-the-scenes subterfuge about what Florida may be doing with Justin Fields. I don't think they're that clever, to be honest with you. And I know maybe there's a degree to that which is wishful thinking, a degree to that which is, I'd like to see Florida take an L under Mullen here to get things started. And I think overall, Mullen's probably going to be a pretty good coach for the Gators. I think he's eventually going to be a pretty good recruiter. But I think it was a mistake to go to Fields' house in Kennesaw that first week on the job. I think it was a mistake to wait until just this week to do an in-home visit with Matt Corral. I mean, he flew all the way across the country to California with a guy like Corral. That's a long way to fly. It's a lot of miles in a private jet for a guy that you weren't that interested in. I think ultimately this is a loss for Florida, not some sort of secret win that's about to emerge with Justin Fields. Because for everything that people want to say about how Corral doesn't fit the Dan Mullen offense, Fields may be the dual-threat quarterback, but look at the way that Nick Fitzgerald ran for Mullen this year. A lot of straight-ahead runs, a lot of almost like, quarterback sneak type runs. You think Justin Fields wants to do that, put his body into a harm's way? My guess is he probably does not. My guess is that while Florida is desperate for Fields, Fields had never heard of Dan Mullen when Mullen went into his house. At least that's my opinion based on the quotes that I read from Justin Fields. I'm a believer that Georgia doesn't have anything to worry about here, although I do understand why some of y'all will pay attention to some of the circumstantial evidence and say it doesn't quite add up to a cut-and-dry situation. I get where that's coming from. Ultimately, I do think that Fields is all dog. Speaking of Florida, kind of one of the funny scenes that are involved with recruiting. So both Florida and Alabama go in-home on the same day with Jacob Copeland, the wide receiver from Pensacola, Florida, who for a while, I guess, was also thought that he might get in the mix with Tennessee because he was close with Jeremy Pruitt. Doesn't look like that's going to happen with Copeland now. It may still be the two schools that it's always been down to, Alabama and Florida for Copeland. But without the quarterback, you're not getting Jacob Copeland. And it would seem to me that this is an example of Florida trying to stay in good with a commit it once had. But, this is one of those things where Mullen, McElwain, who had not been a very good recruiter during his time at Florida, was building a better 2018 class that included Jacob Copeland. But Copeland no longer in that one either. A couple other quick SEC stories I want to get to. Will Grier is going to return to West Virginia. Now, you may wonder why I'd bring up a West Virginia quarterback here on our SEC through. A couple things. Obviously, you remember Grier being the former Florida quarterback. Grier was at Florida, now at West Virginia. And one of the big reasons why the McElwain era ultimately does not end successfully for Florida may have been because of the decision to jettison Will Grier, who goes to West Virginia, puts up big numbers before he got hurt this year. And by the way, for 2018, another tie to the SEC. to begin the season, West Virginia will play Tennessee. So that's Tennessee having to think about Greer, who I think could be a Heisman candidate next season there with the Mountaineers. He is coming back. And then finally, in our SEC through, boy, wouldn't you love to see Georgia get somebody from Oklahoma to say this? I thought it was kind of funny. The UCF running back, his name is Adrian Killens, talking about the upcoming Peach Bowl matchup with Auburn, says that he thinks that Auburn hasn't seen any speed like we have here. It's essentially a shot at the SEC and at Auburn in general, and it's great bulletin board material for the Tigers, who may have some reasons not to be all that excited about going back to Atlanta to play another game, to go back there, not in the college football playoff. This may be some of that motivation that the Tigers need for that game. And boy, you'd love to see somebody from Oklahoma, Baker Mayfield, somebody say something like this about Georgia, who's used this kind of stuff to its advantage all season long. So far, you're not getting a lot of that from Oklahoma. Baker Mayfield's played very nice thus far, talking about his admiration for Herschel Walker, even, who was a player at Georgia way before Mayfield was born, and obviously the legend on the opponent for the Rose Bowl. Right now, Oklahoma's towing a very fine line, not giving Georgia any bulletin board material. UCF playing things a little differently with Auburn. I think some Georgia fans would like the idea, and the opportunity to hate Oklahoma maybe a little more will make that your SEC through. So here on DawgNation Daily, we are coming to you today for the 600th time. And I was a little disappointed because what I wanted to do today was I wanted to kind of go back and compile some of the strange things that have happened over the course of 600 episodes. And, this is we're going to finish up our third year here. We've, like I said, done 600 episodes. You sort of collect some strange things over time, but some of the older shows were actually a little harder to find than I thought they'd be. I couldn't find them archived on my computer. That's because I'm terrible at record keeping. Some of the stuff has even sort of disappeared from the internet, it would seem, given the fact that we changed servers for the podcast at one point in time. So some of the older episodes are actually a little hard to find. But I was able to find the very first episode of our program. Now, for those of you who've only been listening for a little while, this won't mean much for you, but way before we were ever on Facebook Live, way before we were ever on the radio, we were just a podcast. I did it from an Atlanta radio studio, and this is 600 episodes ago, how the very first episode of DawgNation Daily began. Take a listen.
Fans, I'm your host, Brandon Adams, and so great to have all of you with us today for what's going to be an exciting 2015 season and a brand new way of covering it here on DawgNation Daily, where we'll talk Dogs football with you each and every day. We'll catch up with Seth Emerson coming up in about 10 minutes. One of our insiders on the scene in Athens. We'll find out more from him about the state of the quarterback battle and exactly what we could see on the field Saturday against Louisiana Monroe. Before we get to that, though, I want to give an opinion about Georgia and this season. And my belief is the Georgia Bulldogs this year are a college football playoff team. That's right. At the end of the season, when the Final Four is announced, I believe the Georgia Bulldogs are going to be one of those teams still left standing for a chance to win the national championship.
That year, by the way, was 2015. Georgia's quarterback was Grayson Lambert. Dogs finished 9-3. Rick gets fired. Dogs don't maybe even make the top 25 at the end of the season. And yet, at the beginning of the year, I was predicting college football playoff appearances for the Georgia Bulldogs. So listen, my predictions and opinions back then weren't much better than they are right now. But who would have thought way back 600 episodes ago, though, there would be a time, really only a couple years in the future, that college football playoff prediction, well, it wouldn't come true, but it would certainly come into be reality. And now we are talking about the college football playoff. I would say that both DawgNation Daily and the Georgia Bulldogs have come a long way since August of 2015, when the very first episode of DawgNation Daily went down. And I said this a moment ago, and I do mean this in all sincerity, that we wouldn't be able to do what we do without all of you. Whether you've been listening only for a little while, and I still meet people every week who just tuned into the show for the very first time, or if you've been with us for the last 600 episodes, truly grateful for you making this to be such a fun thing for me to get the chance to do each and every day, and really excited to see where DawgNation Daily goes from here. One place that we do know that DawgNation Daily is going is back to Jacksonville again next year. When we started the show, we didn't do the Gator Hater Countdown. That didn't come along until I guess, just last year in year 2 of our program. But now it's a staple. It's something we do each and every day because we believe that good Georgia fans are Gator haters first and foremost. That's why we do it. Some of y'all may wonder, why does this moron count down to the Florida game each and every day? That's why, because we believe that Florida is supposed to be Georgia's #1 rival. And with Justin Fields wearing red and black and not orange and blue, Dogs going back to Jacksonville, get another win against the Gators 316 days from right now. Hope this weekend you'll keep it to DawgNation.com. Jeff Sintel with his Sintel Intel today, and really throughout the weekend going to be following everything that happens for a big official visitor weekend. Up to 7 5-stars on campus for Georgia, leading in the early signing period, which starts on December 20th. We'll cover it all and be back on Monday again at 10 a.m. on DawgNation Daily. Those of you watching us on video right now, we'll also look forward to kind of getting into your comments. One of the things that Michael, one of our producers, said about that very first episode of the program is I was still saying some of the same things then that I'm saying now, some of those little verbal tics, I guess, that I use every day, just like when I say that if you're watching, we'll look forward to taking your comments. But I really do look forward to taking your comments. That's why I say it that same way every day, I guess. Nonetheless, we'll dive into some comments right now. Gary Wismiller says that was before your voice changed. So here's the thing about my voice in that first clip. I feel like I was probably pretty nervous. And I had done a lot of radio leading up to that, but this was like the first time I'd ever done a podcast. And I was, now I have a lot of people that help me. Like, there have been at various times this morning, 3 guys. And Hannah's usually here. She's at the beach right now. But, there's a lot of folks to help us get DawgNation Daily on the air. Back then, it was just me. So I was having to fumble through and push all these buttons by myself and figure out how to do all this by myself. And eventually, I actually got fairly serviceable at doing the technical thing on my own. But on that first day, I think in terms of how to deliver the show, I was probably a little bit nervous. So I kind of noticed that in my in my voice also. Michael Morrow says you can make a drinking game out of all my verbal tics. Yeah, that's probably true. Let me scroll down and get a few more comments here. David Hogue says, congratulations on 600 BA. Wake up at 9:59 and go to sleep at 11:01 every day. Of course, I'd like to change that habit on January the 1st. Well, David, nonetheless, I appreciate you being with us in the show. Really appreciate that. Gary Andrews said that he started on episode 20. That's pretty cool. Nice to think that people have been out there for that long. Philip Jordan Wells said, bless your heart, BA. You had faith in Grayson Lambert. Yeah, that's kind of the case. Chad Williams says I should have redshirted that year. Maybe I should have. Brandon Pope says I was nervous then. Yeah, I think I was a little nervous. Josh Manning talking about the idea of redshirting Justin Fields. I mean, I think one way or another, the notion of redshirting has just sort of gone by the wayside a little bit. I think we're in an era now where, let's say Fields is a great quarterback. Obviously the high end of what a 5-star could be. Well, at that point in time, he's not staying more than 3 years anyway. If you redshirt him or you play him, he's still leaving after his 3rd year out of high school if he's as good as he can be. And if he's not quite as good as the top-end projection would be for him, then it doesn't really sort of matter if you redshirt him or not at that point in time. So one way or another, I just don't know that redshirting is necessarily the way to go. I mean, if he played some in 2018, either in a traditional backup role or in sort of a special circumstances situation, that might be good use of a year of eligibility, especially for a guy that would probably like to go play professional football and just sort of start that clock and get there. I mean, I think that the Knowshon Moreno thing will always hang over Georgia fans' heads in a conversation like this. Moreno was redshirted in 2006, left Georgia after 2008. You only got 2 years of him. So if Fields is good enough that you only get 3 years of him out of high school, then might as well play him some as opposed to not playing him and redshirting. Santiago Diarn says, it's been a ton of fun listening to you in the podcast, seeing you live on Facebook. Can't wait to see the next 600 by 2019. Yeah, Santiago, I certainly appreciate that, and I'm very thankful to have you here. Casey Goff says another thing that I say every day is in that regard. I probably do say that one a good bit. Sometimes I actually do try to go back and listen to a lot of shows, and I notice a lot of that kind of stuff too. And as much as you try to take some of that out of your normal voice cadence, it's just a little harder to do because, I mean, listen, if you look at like my notes, and that's all I have for an hour's worth of talking. It's just a few scribbled notes. So most of this is sort of off the cuff speaking, and I think when you're doing that much off the cuff, there is a tendency to kind of go back into the same verbal patterns over and over again, and that's sort of how that goes. Peter Jeffrey Wilson on the very first episode said, I remember thinking, who is this guy? Well, I guess it's Peter. You probably still think that a lot from time to time. Brian Giles listened to all 600 of them. Brian, that is an incredibly nice thing. Thank you so much. Eric Moody says, what are your thoughts on the big surprise that Jeff Sintel mentioned before? My thoughts are that I wish he'd just let us know. And I get why sometimes this kind of stuff has to be secret. We see this from time to time. What Jeff may, and some of y'all think I know everything that Jeff knows, and that's not true. Occasionally I will find out something that he knows because I'll corner him in the room somewhere from time to time. But like I live in this box. I do DawgNation Daily in here. I do SEC Country Live on the other side of the room. I'm in this box pretty much all day, every day. Jeff's on the recruiting trail, so he and I actually don't talk as much as you might think during the week. So a lot of his secrets remain secret because I don't see him enough to get them from him. This one feels like one he may try to keep a secret from me. Scott Harris asked an interesting question. Who sustains the 30-day break between games better, Oklahoma's offense or Georgia's defense? That's a really good question. What I will say is, and this is not exactly what you asked, but do y'all feel the same way as me? I said this to somebody off the air, either last night or this morning. I can't remember. It feels like the SEC championship game was 14 years ago. Episode 1 of DawgNation Daily feels like it was about this year's SEC championship game. I mean, how long has it been since Georgia has played a football game? How long has it been since Georgia's had a practice? I mean, it feels like this Rose Bowl game is going to happen in the next millennium. So, yeah, long layoff. I don't like that about bowls, never really have. I think it does impact the quality of play. Sometimes you think it hurts an offense more than a defense. I know that's the caricature that gets drawn. I don't know if that's true or not, but it does feel like, man, it's been a long time since Georgia has played. P.D. Wheatstraw said Grayson Lambert had us all fooled after that South Carolina game. Yeah, listen, I was feeling pretty good about myself when Grayson Lambert set those records against South Carolina that day. Mark Lewis Johnson says, we're going to be at the Marlowe's on December 26th. We're normally there on Tuesday. That is the Tuesday that'll be, after the signing period's over with. I'm actually flying to California early that day, so there is no Marlowe's on the 26th. But we will be back at Marlowe's again in January. And I've got to imagine, I mean, listen, I'm terrible at keeping up with the schedule, but we're almost for sure coming to Buford again. Almost for sure. I can't imagine we're not. Hal Love, thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate that. Van Bird says, discovered DawgNation Daily on a trip to Germany in 2016. Great to hear your voice from home talking about the dogs. Have listened ever since. Great job. Van, that's incredibly nice. Really appreciate that. Junior Baker brings up a good point. That you don't redshirt 5-star players, period, unless you're Alabama. It's bad for recruiting. I think that's probably true. Thank you, Shane Guy. Thank you, John Chappell. John, what part of California do you live in? You going to be at the Rose Bowl, I hope? Stephen Word says that one of my favorite phrases is that fair to say? And Stephen, I'll tell you where that comes from. Because I am a talker. I have a tendency to talk about what I think as opposed to ask someone else a question. So when I have Chip on or Jeff on or Seth on, I'll be talking and I realize, oh, yeah, I need to find out what they think. And so therefore I turn what I just said into a question by saying, is that fair to say? Because now I've actually asked them a question they can answer, which is sort of a cheap way of just getting them to talk about what I was just talking about. But I do try to at least turn everything into a question. And so that's where that kind of comes from. I have noticed that also. Peter Jeffrey Wilson says, I better deliver a national championship or we'll look elsewhere. Yeah. Maybe I can bring that to DawgNation this year. I'm not quite sure I have a hand in that, but I'd certainly like to present it. I'd love to be doing the shows where we talk about it. Gary Wismiller, appreciate your kind words. John William Adams, been here since episode 180. John, appreciate that. We are late. I know folks got stuff they got to do. I got to get ready to get out of here. Hal Love is mad at Jeff because he's talking about a surprise. Well, the good news about this surprise is if I understood Jeff correctly, you won't have to wait until Christmas for this one. It won't be like the box shaking to see what it sounds like. Sounds like this one would come a little sooner than that. Adam Hicks, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. All right, I'm late. I would love to be getting more of these comments. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get them all. I agree with what Nick Winston says about Cade Mays. Be a huge get for Georgia's class. Mark Cochran says our show helps him get through work. That's why we do it. And I say this to people all the time. I know what it's like to be on a long commute or just bored at work or in a gym looking for something to take your mind off what it is you're doing. That's why we present the show, and that's why we try to make it as portable and as accessible as we possibly can. And it is a real privilege for me to be with y'all wherever y'all are going. Really appreciate that. Billy Mathis brings up a good point that Isaiah Wilson was a 5-star. He just got redshirted. And that was probably also an example of Georgia at least having a little bit like Alabama type depth there at that group. And I think that based on what I have heard, and I don't have a lot of inside source or anything, but I have heard that Wilson, I think, was kind of okay with what happened to him this year. I don't think that he has a bad taste in his mouth about that. I think he's looking forward to to being on the field and playing a lot. You guys are all great. I really appreciate it. I would love to see her take more comments. I know the show is a little long today because we had extra time with Jeff, but I did want to hit a lot of those questions with Jeff. So if I missed your comment, I apologize for that, but I will love to talk to you again Monday at 10 a.m. Y'all have a great weekend. Big list of visitors. We'll try to recap it all when we get back here on Monday. And we are getting a little closer to the start of the playoff as well. Georgia on the practice field, a lot coming up. We'll talk to you then. Have a great weekend. Thanks for being with us for DawgNation Daily.